submitted. This is the first time we're doing this training, this version of this training. So we are hoping it is helpful. And similar to our other trainings, there will be some kind of natural breaks for questions should you have any. So there'll definitely be opportunities to ask questions kind of on each section that we cover of the training. So without further ado, I'm going to kick us off. Our agenda for today, we'll do a brief orientation on the application and trainings. These are things we've talked about at every training. Then we'll go into the evaluation process, what that looks like. Then we'll go into the clarifying questions, and we'll end with the capacity interview. Introductions for the SPCSA staff on the phone. It's just me and Danny tonight. Melissa's not with us. She is serving as the executive director. And then Danny and I are doing most of the new application stuff, and you will be talking to us frequently. Tonight is our 5th and final training. This will conclude the training series, and the recording will be available on our website tomorrow, as will the slides, and Danny will send those slides out as well. As a reminder, we have 3 really critical documents that make up our application materials. The first one is the guidance document. That includes a ton of background information specific to the application process, specific to the different parts of the process. And then it ends with a side-by-side of the questions and the rubric. Then the application template is the second thing. That's a fillable Word doc that we recommend you just download and complete as is. Please make sure when you're completing the application that the questions within the application stay in the document. And then the rubric describes the characteristics of a strong response. Evaluators use that rubric to score your application. On this screen is the timeline. The notice of intent deadline has passed, which means the next deadline is the application deadline, which is April 30th. We will start collecting completed applications starting April 15th, and then the final deadline is April 30th. Today's training is really going to focus on what happens after the application has been submitted, and really the time frame between May and what we start doing once we receive the applications in May through the middle of July, which will conclude the capacity interviews. As I mentioned, our application guidance is kind of 2 parts. The first part is application overview, other resources, and then the second part puts the rubric criteria right next to the application questions. So you can kind of take a look at what you're being evaluated on for each of the questions. And it also gives you like additional guidance at the bottom if there is any. We have 2 applicant types. A committee to form is our more popular and more common type. And there's various membership requirements as outlined in Nevada statute. And then a CMO can also choose to apply as a CMO, and then they can decide that they want to hold the charter contract, or they'll establish a governing board and transfer the charter contract to the governing board. There's sort of various requirements for either one of those. If you're not sure where you fit, you're probably in the committee to form, but feel free to reach out to us at any point if you're not sure. All right, without further ado, we will move into the evaluation process, and I'm going to hand it over to Danny to complete these slides.
Good evening, everyone. All right, Katie, go ahead and go to the next slide. So for these next few slides, we're going to go ahead and go over what it is that we do as part of our application evaluation. We're going to be looking into what the completeness check means. We're going to be kind of discussing what the evaluation is from the SPCSA and the external reviewers. Who are these evaluators? And how does the criteria that is listed as part of the rubric that Katie referenced earlier, how is that used as part of our review of the charter applications? And then what if there's any questions or don't understand kind of like what was submitted from the review team? We'll kind of dig into a little bit of that as well as part of the next few slides. So the first major point after the submission of the application is what we call the completeness check. The completeness check is conducted by SPCSA staff between May 1st and May 15th. The completeness check uses the checklist, which is contained both in our application guidance document and in the application. And that is what we use as part of our review of the submitted application. A couple of things to note about the completeness check. We, as part of the initial review, are only reviewing the application for technical compliance. So what does technical compliance mean? Basically, what we're looking for is, did the applicant submit all of the necessary attachments? Did the applicant answer all of the questions? Does the applicant's committee to form meet statutory requirement? Does the applicant, if they're choosing to submit as a CMO, is that referenced, and did they fill out the addendum piece of it? And so what we do is we go through and we do this initial review. We are not reviewing the application for material criteria aspects of the rubric. Basically, we're going through and we're using the check boxes that are included as part of the application itself to see, yes, they did this, yes, they did this. In the event that the application is not technically compliant, what we will do is we will reach out to the committee to form liaison, and we will say, these items were not part of the app, you were missing question in special ed section, and we will give you 48 hours to cure this. If the application is deemed to be not technically compliant, we will not move that application on to a full review, and that is kind of the end of the application cycle for that piece. We try to be we try to work with the applicants on that technical piece because there is a lot of aspects of the application. So we will definitely reach out early and let you all know if there are parts that are missing. So keep an eye out. Basically, between May 1st and May 15th, we may reach out if we have questions regarding the technical aspects of the charter application. So what is evaluation? What is it that the SPCSA, along with our external evaluators, what are we looking for when the application is submitted and it goes into a full review? So at this point, the application has been deemed technically complete, and now it's being moved on to a full review. So our evaluators will examine all of the evidence presented, the written application, the attachments. We'll get into it a little bit later, but responses to the clarifying questions and the capacity interview, which will also be touched upon later on in the training today. We will not compare applications in this cycle to each other, so one application to another, or if you have submitted an application in previous cycles, that will not be reviewed, or that's not compared to as part of this submission itself. These are wholly single submissions that we review as like the first time they've been submitted. Our evaluators apply their expertise to assess whether there is evidence that the application meets the evaluation criteria. That criteria can be found in our application rubric. We've really tried to align our rubric in with the application questions themselves, so it's very clear as to where this application section is going to be referenced in the rubric, and we always encourage applicants as they are completing the application to review that rubric in alignment with when the application is being submitted, so that you're clear as to what we're going to be looking for in each section and also within each subsection of the academic, the operations, the financial, etc. We will not review an application from a committee to form or CMO whose submissions have previously been evaluated. So basically, a reviewer who may have been on an application in a prior cycle will not be reviewing the application if it is again submitted as part of a new cycle, so that we can eliminate any sort of biases that reviewer may have had during a previous cycle. The evaluation, we record the strengths and weaknesses of each section and attachment. So basically the reviewers go through the application. We have the rubric, we have the strengths, we have the weaknesses. In addition to that, we also have clarifying questions, which I said before, we're going to get to as in later slides. But so that's what our review team does as part of that. Each reviewer is doing this on their own in their own kind of review period. Evaluators will not discriminate against any school for its model type, location, targeted student population, or any other reason. So, you know, if we're not reviewing based on like we think this model works well or not, if the applicant can provide evidence that they have that they can show that this model will work in the proposed community, that is the criteria in which our review team is going into with this. Next slide. So who's on the evaluation team? Typically, each cycle is different depending on the amount of applications that we receive. But generally speaking, there is one SPCSA staff who is employed full-time by the State Public Charter School Authority. They will be assigned to an application. We also contract with people we call external evaluators. Anybody who's looking to kind of find further information on what an actual external evaluator is can reference NRS 388A.249.2a. Each of the reviewers, both the evaluation within the SPCSA staff and those who are external reviewers, receive detailed trainings from both Katie, myself, regarding the application evaluation process and the evaluation criteria. We do this every single year, no matter how many times a reviewer has done a review of an application during one of our cycles. They are required to complete a training for that cycle so that they're up to date on any sort of changes that may have occurred over the previous cycle and that everyone's kind of on the same page moving into the review piece. Like I said before, each individual reviewer does an independent review. After that independent review is done, then they will work together to compile and finalize overall ratings. Each reviewer that is external and internal complete conflict of interest forms and disclosures to ensure that there is no conflicts that may inhibit their review of the application. They also sign confidentiality agreements, which we'll get into in a further slide. So when I was saying the external evaluators, like who are they? How does the SPCSA recruit them? What are the criteria that they need to meet in order to be able to be part of our review team? So these external reviewers are contractors for the state. They are they basically sign 4-year contracts that they are able to review. We pay them per application. This kind of matters in the sense that they're not affected by the state or local politics or personalities. Many a times these reviewers are outside of the state of Nevada, which is kind of further down here. They have a deep understanding in the charter school sector, often including charter school authorizing. So a lot of our external reviewers have either been authorizers themselves, they've opened charter schools, they've served in state boards, all those type of things. They bring a real rich knowledge of the environment in order to help us kind of get a full picture of the application, both within Nevada and then also kind of just taking best practices and all the nationwide things. They kind of bring that expertise that, sometimes when you're reviewing things within a specific state, it's good to have that outside perspective. Many a times they are going to be working virtually, and like I said, they're not often located in Nevada. This kind of, this matters in the fact that they're not competing with any Nevada schools or new applicants for resources. They're bringing in outside perspective that's non-biased. Frequently, they serve as reviewers for new application processes in other states. So many of the reviewers that are going to be externally contracting externally with the state here as part of this review process do application reviews for many different states across the nation. Applicants don't need to waste their time, waste their limited space explaining common educational terms. These folks are highly experts in all of the various aspects of, education. And so they get the acronyms, which we know in education, there are quite a few of. Many of our reviewers have worked on multiple previous SPCSA application cycles, which kind of should just build the expertise both for the Nevada specific aspects of it. But like I said before, if an applicant has submitted an application in the past, you will not be seeing an external reviewer or an internal SPCSA reviewer that has reviewed a prior application, and they do remain anonymous. Now, that there's kind of it's interesting, like when we do a capacity interview, you're obviously going to see these folks, you're going to see their names. You as the applicant team will know who they are. But in the event that an application is denied or we receive a public record request, statute does permit us to take and redact the reviewers' names for any sort of outside requests that we may receive. This way that the SPCSA, they're not beholden to basically, our agency. They can provide full feedback without the worry that, their information may be out there after a review period. So you'll see who they are, but at the same time, in the event that a challenge has occurred, their names will be redacted as far as any sort of public record requests. So what is the evaluation process? So you have now submitted the application on by April 30th. What's going to happen from both the SPCSA side and your side moving through the entire period here? So you have the initial review, right? So the application has been deemed technically compliant. It has been moved to what we call the initial review. Each evaluator, like I said before, are reviewing that application, comparing it to the rubric criteria, and rating it on their own. After that has occurred, the evaluation team will meet as a group in order to discuss each other's findings. And with that, we will kind of talk about, well, I rated this section as does not meet, or you rated as it approaches, and we kind of have a discussion around, maybe some differences in the opinion on the application itself. And we come to a consensus as part of that initial evaluation meeting. From that initial evaluation meeting, what we do is we will consolidate questions that we're going to get into later that are basically what we call clarifying questions. And those clarifying questions are questions that we have that are questions that we would expect an applicant to be able to answer in a few sentences or a paragraph. Maybe there's some inconsistencies around the staffing chart that was found in the budget with what the staffing chart was included as part of the operations plan. Maybe you had 1.5 FTE for a special ed in year 3, but then the financial plan only showed a 1 FTE in year 3. Those are some inconsistencies that we understand may occur because it's a 500 plus page document. So those would be items that we would reach out to for clarifying questions. During that time, we'll send those out, and then the applicant will review those, respond to them. Once those responses are received, the review team will review those written clarification questions. After the clarifying questions are responded to, you'll be hearing from Katie and I prior to, and Dina as well, pretty close to after the submission of the application. What we'll be doing is scheduling capacity interviews. The capacity interview is kind of where the SPCSA will be able to kind of dig in further on, and the external reviewers will be able to dig in further with the applicant group in a interview setting. That will be detailed later by Katie. And then at the end of the process, after all the different aspects that have been occurred, the evaluation team will have what we call the consensus meeting. From there, we basically go back through both the initial review, any changes that may have occurred during the capacity interview or the clarifying questions, and we come to a consensus as a group as to how to rate each section of the application and come to an overall recommendation for our board. So that's the process that's occurring after you submit to us. You'll be hearing from us quite a bit throughout. In the initial stages, basically the technical part of it, the clarifying question part of it, and then scheduling the capacity interview. In the interim between that, you won't hear from us because we kind of dig in and really get to the review point. So we're not expecting to see a lot of additional information that is submitted to us after the submission of the application. But that's the process that we use both with an SPCSA staff member and then external reviewers. So with that, I am more than happy to take any questions that you all may have. There's quite a few people here, so if you would like, just go ahead and take yourself off mute, and happy to answer any questions regarding the evaluation process itself.
And we will go further into detail in this presentation about the capacity interview and the clarifying questions. So if you have some questions on that, that might be answered soon. Yep. But I think if you've got like some high level process questions, now would be a good time.
Okay, Katie, I will go ahead and turn it back over to you.
All right. So I'm going to take it next to the clarifying questions and really go over what this process is. We're going to talk a little bit about why we have an opportunity for written clarification, what is involved in the process, how we develop the questions, what types of questions are common, and then like some guidance for developing responses. So first thing, I think it's important to decide, why do we need these written clarifications? And the first is to resolve internal contradictions. You know, the application itself is often 100+ pages. You add in the attachments, we get into the thousands. You've got a financial plan workbook. And so oftentimes there will be some internal discrepancies that we would like clarification on. It may be the title that you're calling the leader of the school. The application refers to it as the executive director, but the organization chart calls it the principal. We'll want clarification on like who is going to be leading the school, who reports to whom, are those the same, are they different? Another example, the narrative describes PD taking place every Friday during school hours, but the daily and weekly schedule you provide for students and teachers doesn't show that the PD is happening on that day. So there are oftentimes discrepancies that will occur. We will find those discrepancies and we will ask you to clarify, you know, we found these two things, which of these is correct? So that's a big one. The other one is, another big one is addressing and correcting inconsistencies. And so this is often a sort of mismatch between the identified population and some of the model or teaching staff you're using. So for example, the demographic projections that you put in your application show that English learners will be about 50% of your anticipated student population, but your staffing chart indicates that you will not have certified EL staff until year 3. And so then our question would be like, well, how are you going to support those students in year 1 and year 2 if you don't have dedicated staff to do that? Another example, your staffing chart shows a total of 12 teachers in year 1, but the narrative indicates that all classrooms will be using a co-teaching model, and the FFE&T worksheet indicates that you will have 12 classrooms in year 1. So if you've got co-teaching happening, is that, you know, happening at the same time? So you've got 12 teachers across 6 classrooms, or kind of just clarify what that looks for us. And then the last thing might be further evidence. So perhaps you include a resume for your proposed school leader, and it shows she served as an elementary school teacher for 10 years and an assistant principal at a middle school, but you have selected her to lead a high school. So we might ask for experience and expertise that demonstrates that she's prepared to lead a high school when she doesn't have any of that high school experience. So those are kind of the 3 big things. Typically, written clarification questions should be more factual and answered in a couple of sentences, whereas some of the capacity interview questions are going to perhaps be like more philosophical or require more digging in from members of the committee to form. So what to expect? You'll receive 2 documents. The first will have questions on it, and the second will be a response template for you to respond to the questions in. The questions that will go out looking like this. So the question will be numbered on the left side. The clarifying question will be listed in the middle section. It'll identify which rubric section it is. So, which subsection of the rubric or application this comes from, and then any pages in the application that's being referred to. So like there's a page number here, a sentence here, and then, a question regarding that section from the rubric. So you'll get something that looks exactly like this. If there are needed pages of the application for you to go back to, that'll be there for you to reference. So you can see exactly what it is that the review team is asking for clarification on. Then you'll respond on this. And so this is the document that you should put your responses on. You'll put your response to question 1 here next to question 1. And so the response to this question should be listed over here, and those should match. We do have a general rule of thumb, and we work really hard as a review team during the initial process. Kind of everybody on the review team generates what they think are going to be capacity interview questions and clarifying questions. And then the lead reviewer will kind of put together all the clarifying questions and, combine duplicative questions and things like that. But one of the things that we work really hard to trim the list, but a really important indication of how the review is going so far is the longer the list of questions you receive that need clarification, the further the application is from meeting the standard for approval. So if you've got, I would say, more than like 50 clarifying questions, that's indicating that the review team has quite a few questions that need additional information that does not typically lead to an application that we ultimately recommend for approval. So it's really important to note that, I would say probably 30 to 50 questions starts to be concerning, but the longer your list of questions, the less likely you are to have your application approved. And then you do get 4 business days to respond. So these will come from me. You will get the questions, and then you'll get information about the capacity interview from me. And you'll want to get started on them quickly because you do only get 4 business days to get a completed document back to SPCSA staff. We send it back to the review team, and they have it all reviewed by the time the capacity interview happens. So I started to touch on this, but the questions are developed as we read through the initial application. We write down questions that we need answered, and then we compile those into one document, remove duplicative ones, combine questions as we can. And then we go through a consolidated list of questions that everybody has in advance of our group meeting. And people go through and kind of figure out like, okay, this is something that like, actually we maybe need to talk about in the capacity interview, or like, actually I did find the answer to this later on in the application. I don't need this clarified anymore. So we kind of revise that list as a group before we send it out. And then we talk about, if these questions would be better in an interview, do we need an attachment fixed? So like if there are some, like if we did, one of the things is like, if we look at the minutes that you've outlined and it doesn't seem like it's adding up to the required seat time minutes, we may ask you to fix an attachment to make sure it does align to that. And then we also try to identify areas of priority so that we can really get clarification on the big things that matter. And if there are small, like missing pieces, perhaps we can clarify that at a later date. So types of questions, some of them will be on the narrative. They'll ask for additional detail or an explanation of the meaning of something. They'll ask to provide concrete examples of something. Perhaps you're doing a co-teaching model in a, STEM school, and they'll ask you to really explain what kind of co-teaching model you've identified that works in that STEM setting, or provide data or evidence to support a statement or idea. This is a pretty common one we see. We look for, can you provide us with additional data that shows that this model works with this student population? And we do lean heavily on wanting to see success of the model working, rather than just sort of a thought that it could work. Attachments is one. If we ask for you to correct an incomplete or confusing attachment to fix it, or respond to inconsistencies, and that's generally going to be inconsistencies between attachments and a narrative, or even amongst multiple attachments. And then there'll also likely be questions in the financial plan workbook. There might be specific line item questions like, oh, in year one, you've budgeted for $25,000 of supplies. What are the things you're purchasing that make up that $25,000, or something like that? If you've got, a plan to have a $500 per month lease, we may ask for the basis of that calculation and the source of the information that indicates you'll find the lease for $500. Or we may just ask for clarifications regarding some of your assumptions or categories of expenses, how you're reaching the conclusions you've reached, or if there's inconsistencies between the financial plan workbook and the narrative. Like the financial plan workbook indicates you'll have 100 students in year one, but in your enrollment that you've identified in the application, it says 50 students. And so help us understand those discrepancies. So then I think it's important to talk about how we should respond to the questions. And so I think first and foremost, it's important to really read and understand the questions. Make sure you understand what we're asking. I would recommend doing this quickly because, again, you only have 4 business days to do that. Reach out to me or Danny, and it'll probably be me because I'll send you the information initially. If you don't understand a question, reach out to me and I will help you try to understand it. But then just start working on those responses immediately so that they can be submitted during the deadline. As you're writing the responses, you'll want to make sure you're using the provided template and that the question numbers are matching from the template to the questions we've sent you. You want to address the question that's asked, and it's really important to note this is not a time in which you're going to change or add elements to the school or like rethink something and make it different. It needs to be true to what you've put in the application. It's not like a time for new or additional ideas that you're going to add to the application. And then you only will provide additional documents if they're specifically requested. So if we ask for something, then you'll do that. And then last, I think as you're submitting them, you'll want to make sure you follow the instructions. You've named the document, how I tell you to name the document. Everything's prepared. It's converted to a PDF if you want to convert it to a PDF, and everything comes back in one submission. It's important to remember that the evaluators are curious to learn more about kind of what you're asking or what you're proposing. It might be related to your vision, but like generally the people that are evaluating these charter school applications are believers in charter schools. And as such, like they're here to be of support and are coming at this from a really good place. It's also important to remember that our evaluators are experts in this sector and do this work a lot and have done it for many, many years, and can very well find pieces in our applications that will indicate if the school is going to work and be ready to open. So these are experts evaluating it, and they are going to point out things that are going to help you hopefully improve the application and improve the idea through this process. The third one is a really big one. Keep in mind as you're answering these questions that the evaluators have read the application from start to finish. And so if you're getting a question, we don't need you to just like rephrase or resend a sentence that you have in the application, it's really important to like understand this is a question regardless of what you've already put in the application. So help us understand it. Don't just like copy and paste something from the original application. Rephrase it in a way that is like helping us understand the information we're missing. And then again, understand the implications of the length of the list of questions. So if you get a very long list of clarifying questions, understand that you've left the evaluation team with a long list of questions, which generally is not indicative of a strong application. Things that applicants should not do is, again, refer back to the original documents without providing additional details. So don't just send them back to page 3 of the application and give nothing else. Expand further to really get to the heart of the question that's being asked. Again, refuse to answer the questions, which is similar to kind of what I just said. If you just tell people like this has been answered on, page 3, that doesn't really help them understand an answer. Provide unrequested or irrelevant information. So try to stick to the question at hand rather than going on about something that maybe seems similar but is not actually going to help them understand the question. Provide additional documents that are not explicitly requested. So if we don't ask you to redo something or submit something, just you don't need to submit it. And then again, this is not an opportunity to rewrite large sections of the application or address sections that don't have questions for them. You really want to stay focused on the question asked, provide the information to answer those questions, and really just help clarify those areas. So that takes us to the end of that. Before we get into the capacity interview, are there any questions on the clarifying questions? All right, I'll keep going then. So the capacity interview is sort of the last portion of the application review. We're going to talk about who participates, why it's important, the structure and timing, responding to questions during the interviews, and then navigating the scenario-based question. So for the participants, from the evaluation team, it'll be members of the SPCSA leadership team. So I will not be the lead evaluator on every application, but I will attend every capacity interview. Danny will attend every capacity interview, and Melissa will also likely attend every, if not or most of the capacity interviews. It'll be at least 2 SPCSA staff evaluators, and that should say 1 because there's only 1 typically, but you'll have an additional over the lead SPCSA staff members will be in attendance, and then the external evaluators. So it'll be about 6 people from our side. We also have people, we use the application process to train our staff for the next cycle. So there may be other SPCSA staff members who are kind of shadowing. So they're watching the process, but they're not participating in the interview, but they may, be on screen. From the applicant team, we ask that the entire committee to form attend and participate. If the proposed school leader is not part of the committee to form, but they have been identified, we ask for the school leader to participate. The members of the proposed board must attend and participate. And, if you've got some board members that aren't on the committee to form, but are identified as board members, you want them there. If you plan to partner with an EMO, a CMO, or a back office provider, you may invite a representative of that organization to attend, with the caveat that we really look for those people playing a minimal role in responding to our questions, because we want to see that the committee to form and really the proposed board is providing us with the bulk of the information. It will not include observers or individuals who are not listed in the application, and it will also not include consultants, such as people who helped you prepare your application. So if you had help with that, those people would not be included in this stage of it. The capacity interviews will be scheduled between July 1st and July 18th. I will reach out to each liaison mid to late May with 2 or 3 days and times that you can schedule your capacity interview. And we'll book it for that date and time. And then the capacity interview will be scheduled between July 1st and July 18th. They are all going to be virtual this year. I think the guidance documents indicates they may be in person, but they will all be virtual. And I know a lot of people travel in that time, but it is really important that the people who have to participate have that on their schedule and are making themselves available during that window. It is virtual, so people can kind of participate from anywhere, but we'll nail down a date and time toward the middle/end of May. And then you'll want to be proactive when we contact you to send a date, and then we'll ask you to confirm with a list of attendees who will be there as well. So the purpose of the capacity interview, we really want to hear some of the specific team members explain programs or elements of the model or school. It's also an opportunity for the review team to gain a deeper understanding of the committee to form and propose board members. We will ask you about community engagement and how your school will add value to the community. It won't be phrased like that, but we'll really want to understand how your school is sort of matching the community that you've identified. And then I think probably one of the biggest things is that really helps us evaluate the capacity of the whole applicant team and really get an idea of their preparedness to begin this work. So how does the applicant team demonstrate capacity? So this is really pretty important, and I think we're hoping that kind of talking about some of this now helps people prepare. But it's important first that the team is prepared to speak to every part of the application, including the attachments in the financial plan workbook. Now, that does not mean that every person needs to speak to every single part of the application, but generally as a team, it should be clear that as a team, you fully understand the application and all of its various parts and are prepared to speak to it. And that understanding should go pretty deep. There should be a pretty deep understanding that is then also able to be communicated back to a team. The proposed board members specifically should be able to talk about their oversight duties and what it means to be on a board. That includes fiscal responsibilities, that lives entirely with the board. Academic accountability also lives with the board, and operational functions. So those will be things that, we'll kind of ask the board members specifically about. And then they should also be able to answer some of the questions in other areas of the discussion and then in the scenario, which we'll talk about in a second. The applicant team members should again be actively participating in responding to questions, and it should be pretty balanced. We do not want 1 or 2 people that are answering every single question while everybody else just kind of sits back. That does not demonstrate a capable team. And we do not look for that one-man show, and that is actually a big red flag. We want to see sort of equal participation among the group, and it should be clear that like everybody has played a role here and everybody understands this application that was put forward. Individuals focus on their area of expertise. So again, like we don't need every person on the call answering every single question. It'll be important to kind of think about who's going to be responsible for which areas, and those people should kind of be experts in those areas and be able to really respond to questions well. And then again, that kind of goes with the last one. The teams decided which individuals should take the lead on certain topics, and or are easily able to direct questions to the most expert member. So if you've got a person on your team who's like, oh, Joe is our finance guy. He can help explain that piece of something. So the interview flow, we will book capacity interviews for 2 hours, I think. Is it 90? Yeah, 2 hours. We'll start with introductions. We'll introduce the review team, and then the applicant team will have a chance to introduce themselves. There'll be a period of question and answering. There'll be a scenario exercise, and then it will conclude. And a lot of this will also be included in the communication that goes out in June to kind of prep you. But the introductions will start, the Q&A will take up the bulk of it, the scenario exercise will happen at the end, and then we'll conclude and answer any questions if there are any. So again, to prepare for your interview, kind of think about who the different primary responders are for each application area. And again, we do not need like every person answering every question. Kind of think about who knows what and who's best prepared to speak to what section of the application. Only committee to form members may provide initial responses. So once we've asked a question, we're looking for the committee to form or propose governing board members to provide initial responses to those questions. You know, some of the EMO, CMO, or back office support people can certainly provide some like small additional clarifying information, but those people should not be the individuals taking the lead in the interview. We think it's helpful to sometimes have a practice interview, you know, have a colleague in the sector, an application writer, or another partner that could lead a capacity interview. Opportunity 180 is often a good option. And then as individuals, you know, you really, if the person who's identified as the expert in an area, they should really know that area of the application, but also kind of understand how it connects to the rest of the application. It's important to also know how it connects to the financial plan workbook. Individuals should be fully prepared to speak about their sections of the application and speak to it well and in depth. And then proposed board members should be expected to kind of address multiple areas of the application that are specifically related to the involvement of the board. So the other thing that's important to note is the way that these questions are asked. We will move them quickly because we often have a lot of questions to ask and we want to understand things on a deep level. So I think first and foremost, it's important to like really listen to the question that's being asked, clarify if you want, but then spend about 2 to 3 minutes on an initial response and making sure that response is clear and concise. If the evaluator like needs additional information that you're not providing, they will reframe the question. But you don't want to spend 10 minutes on answering one question because that's not going to get like that's not going to show the evaluation team that like it won't allow for them to get to all the areas they want. So you really want to try to focus on like 2 to 3 minutes to answer that question. And then if the evaluation team has additional follow-up, they'll ask it. But you don't want to be in a situation in which everybody's kind of saying 2 or 3 minutes and you've spent 10 minutes on one question because that's just far too long. And we will start to move you along and kind of, you know, say, sorry to interrupt, but we got to move to the next question. So you want to try to be as concise but clear as possible, and make sure that you're able to move through questions fairly quickly so that the evaluation team is able to ask all their questions and get all of the kind of additional information they're seeking. The scenario question comes at the very end, and what will happen will be your evaluation team will write a scenario question that we've asked you to work through. So it might be based on a data set. It might be academic, like tests related to test scores. It could be related to enrollment numbers, attendance, you know, funding. You thought funding was going to be available. All of a sudden it's not. What are you going to do? But we'll write out a complete scenario with data and with figures, and it'll be very specific. At this section of the capacity interview, we will email it to all participants so they can access it. We will read it out loud, and then we will give you a certain length of time to think through your response as a group. And so we'll we'll turn our cameras off and we'll watch you kind of process and work through this. And then we'll ask for a completed answer and response at the end of the time that we allow. So you'll have an opportunity to really demonstrate working together, thinking through things, kind of coming to a consensus, and then providing a response. So this would be an example scenario question. We had Young Women's Leadership Academy apply, and they had some really specifics around some of the gender stuff. And so this is saying the board is, kind of at the bottom here, the board's committed to finalizing the school's policy in the next 2 months. Describe the next steps the board will take in order to ensure that it meets the legal requirements to have a policy regarding the rights and needs of persons with diverse gender identities or expressions while working to address the concerns of all members of the school community. It's kind of the crux of the question. And again, we give the whole committee time to think, process, work together to come up with an answer, and then we ask for an answer at the end. And it is through the capacity interview and through this scenario. If you go back to our rubric, there are a couple of sections, particularly in the incubation year section, the board section, and the school leader section that really look to evaluate the capacity of the team. And that's really done through the capacity interview. So there are certain areas of the rubric that are only evaluated during the capacity interview. And those ratings can sometimes, push an application that wasn't quite meeting standards up to meeting standards. So it's just really important to be prepared and be able to demonstrate, like, the group can work together. We don't expect everybody to have all the answers because nobody does. But we want to see you think through. We want to see you process. We want to see it's clear this is a group that's been working through this whole application and is prepared to work through opening a school. So are there any questions on any of that related to the capacity interview? All right. Last thing we have are some capacity interview do's and don'ts. Some do's is to Sable, go ahead.
My question is not relevant to that content. So I can wait and ask my question later.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you.
So capacity interview do's, let the evaluation team drive the capacity interview. We will have identified the areas that we want to focus on in the capacity interview. So kind of let us get to those areas. Be prepared for interruptions. Like I said, we may interrupt and say, that gives us the answer we're looking for. Next question. Again, it's not to be rude. It's not to be short, but we're trying to get through a lot of information. Focus on answering the question you're asked, not just if we ask you about a specific question about the model, we don't need a 10-minute discussion, related to the success of high schools generally or something like that. You really want to focus on the question that's asked in the context it's asked and focus on answering that. Beware of your tone. Make sure it's clear. Make sure it's easy to follow. Share the spotlight. Again, we kind of want equal participation amongst the committee to form and the proposed board. And then this is a big one. We all recommend each person should have the application available. That includes the attachments and the financial plan workbook. So every person on your team should show up with those in hand or on a screen or whatever, but you'll want to be able to reference those throughout the capacity interview. Some don'ts, don't be distracted or inattentive. Focus on the interview. Don't piggyback on responses. So if a response has been provided, don't feel like you have to add something just for the sake of adding it. An answer is good. We can move on. Avoid overly phoning a friend or relying on the EMO, CMO, or back office provider to provide answers. They are a resource for you. They can provide small technical pieces, but the heart of what we're asking should be answered by the committee to form and the proposed board. And then don't cut off the evaluators. Make sure you hear their full question. Make sure you understand it before you start talking. So managing your team. Some scenarios will ask a specific person to lead the response. So we may say, this question is for the board chair, or this question is for the school leader. If this is not the case, have someone to kind of lead the discussion and someone specific to say like, oh, blah, blah, blah is responsible for answering operational questions, and they can kind of punt it to that person. For your scenario, take time to read what we send you, take time to think through it, work through it as a group. Take notes. We recommend taking notes, particularly on the scenario, so that like you come to some sort of answer to share out. It's not just about developing that answer, but also on providing one. And then unless otherwise specified, the EMO, CMO, or back office provider should not really be a participant in the scenario question. I'm going to skip that questions and just say important upcoming dates. So we have the window for letters of intent. We received those. We've reached out, I think, to all the committee liaisons and have scheduled one-on-one meetings. If you haven't heard from us, please let me know and we'll get that scheduled. The applications are due via Epicenter between April 15th to April 30th. Danny will send you an invitation to get that all squared away. Again, go to our guidance document, use that as your #1 resource. We are happy to answer questions, but it's really helpful to us that it's clear that you've looked at our guidance. And then our interviews will be held between July 1st and July 18th. So make sure all of your necessary people have that in their calendars and plan to be available during that timeline. Again, in May, middle to late May, I will follow up with additional information for dates and times, and then we will schedule from there. So I think I'll end with that and now say if there are any questions on anything we went over, please feel free to ask. And if not, have a great day.
I do have a question.
Yeah.
Is there a minimum requirement on student enrollment requests?
No, but more is always better.
Okay.
Oh, well, Danny will answer.
One other thing too is we typically in our document we're looking to have about 30% of the projected year 1 enrollment as part of the application itself. So that is a good kind of idea as to where you're going to be shooting for.
Very well, thank you. That was very informative. Thank you.
Hi, quick question. The capacity meetings, will those be in person or will those be remote?
They'll be virtual.
Thank you.
And Dolly, which school are you with? Okay. Let me look to see, but if we haven't sent one, I'll have Dina send one tomorrow. Yes, the communications via email. We do most of our communication via email. It looks like it was sent February 7th at 3 p.m. to dollyalexander@gmail.com. But I'm happy to send it again.